We are the least developed countries, the LDCs. We, as the LDC core team, are a group of 10 members. At the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, we represent 48 nations across Africa and Asia. I am Sandra Freitas of Togo and have been the technical advisor to the LDC group since 2011. Being an international consultant on climate change, I support and advise our chairman, Mr. Tozi Mapani, during the preparations of key frameworks on climate change. As 48 is a large number of countries and individual governmental systems to be tied all together under one name, the least developed countries, in order to ensure that our views and actions against climate change are in sync, each of the 48 nations representatives submits and updates on a regular basis their intended nationally determined contribution to minimise the effects of climate change. In addition, each country has a national adaptation program of action, which is revised each year. The United Nations classifies and evaluates each year the least developed countries based on the nation's low gross national income, the nation's weak human assets, and their degree of economic vulnerability. As also expressed on our website, we as the LDC core team have two aims when working at the intergovernmental negotiations under the UN Framework Convention. One, to insist that the wealthier nations, including the United States of America, act in accordance with their responsibility for creating the issue in the first place, and to demand that they then demonstrate their capability to resolve the problem. Two, to ultimately prevent climate change, which is in fact creating extremely dangerous environmental situations for our countries. We are especially vulnerable to climate change, as according to Anna Tong in a TED Talk with Chris Anderson in December last year, islands such as the Kiribati are experiencing rising sea levels, being forced to leave their homes, but they have in fact done very, very little to create the global problem of climate change.
I'm Dr. Samaya Zakilden. I'm a member of the LDC core team and also an assistant professor at the Institute of Environmental Studies at the University of Khartoum. As a representative of the LDC, it is imperative that we acknowledge the effects and difficulties that the 48 nations are under the continuum of climate change. The purpose here is to inform you the effects that climate change has on LDC nations and hopefully evoke further action. According to the Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries and Landlocked Developing Countries, and also the Small Island Developing States, climate change primarily affects the countries of Africa and Asia and also the minority of small islands across the Pacific. In Africa, the dramatic change in weather intensifies drought and the difficulty of cultivating crops. The change in weather also affects human health, which is primarily evidenced through the increased disease of malaria in Africa. Since over 70% of LDC is reliant on agriculture to survive, it is far more likely that they are vulnerable to the environmental dangers due to climate change. These are things such as land degradation, drought, desertification, deforestation, water and air pollution. An article by The Guardian mentions that just south of Africa in Sahel, nomadic communities face dire conditions where changes in rainfall patterns and rising temperatures have withered and destroyed crops and houses. Repeatedly, one year rainfall would be scarce, and then the next heavy flooding destroys communities, resulting in crops withering and causing a nationwide food crisis, where over 18 million people, including children, are at a risk of starvation. Ultimately, families do not migrate due to economic opportunity, but a severe shifting in the climate. Further on, small developing islands are also impacted by climate change. The greatest issue facing these islands is the rise of sea levels and submergence of communities living on the island. According to the National Climate Assessment Report, scientists state that since the 1800s, sea levels have risen over 8 inches and is predicted to increase 1 to 4 feet by the end of the centuries. On the small Pacific island of the nation of Kiribati, the President Anna Tong, in 2014 at a retreat, discussed the increase of sea levels and also another problem, ocean acidification. Because of increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and absorbing CO2, is beginning to destroy marine ecosystems and a source of food for the communities. As a result, to keep their culture and nation living, some communities have already begun to relocate to New Zealand or to a small island in Fiji, recently purchased by the Kiribati government. Finally, With this in mind, it is clear that the LDC countries are not instigators of the problem, but victims. We are not able to assist in the solution of climate change as it requires the resources from wealthier and adapting countries to contribute.
Solutions. We believe that the best solution to prevent climate change is, quite simply, to reduce the production of electricity. According to our previous chair as well, Mr. Prakash Mathima of Nepal, we believe a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions can be achieved when there is a transparency of action and support from developing countries. We do not have the monetary means to support and create new ways of electricity production, but we are on the front line of experiencing the effects of climate change. In response to this undeserved situation we are in, we believe that a solution for a fair and achievable approach to attacking climate change is a legally binding instrument that accepts the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Defined by the United Nations, this principle at the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change acknowledges the different capabilities and differing responsibilities of individual countries in addressing climate change. With the continuing support of developing countries, we too can make a difference. Each step made towards fewer greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere, the better chance we have to not have to relocate from our homes, suffering the effects of climate change.
I am Mr. Tozi Mupanu, Chairman of the LDC Group for Climate Change Convention, and will be answering two issues addressed today. These are the challenges we face combating climate change and the members we're in agreement with present at the Paris Convention. As mentioned earlier by Sandra and Sumaya, climate change is a relevant and pressing issue on the least developed countries due to a wide range of reasons. I will start with the geographical issues. As we're made up of 48 different countries spread around the world, geography is a relevant issue to address. Not only does this limit our response as each country is governed differently, making policies to directly address the issues of climate change difficult, but we are limited by location. Africa, the continent where 2/3 of our 48 countries are derived from, is at the most risk to a changing climate. Being agricultural based with some of the world's poorest economic regions, natural disasters caused by climate change will hit Africa first and hardest. Floods and droughts alike already wreak havoc throughout the continent. This information and more can be found on the official United Nations website. I will now address the political issues. As previously mentioned, the LDCs are defined as a group of differing countries from around the world. This lack of unification, combined with the nature of an underdeveloped country, provides obvious restrictions of politics relating to climate change responses. The second question I wish to address today is which other stakeholders from the Paris Convention do we align ourselves with? Those countries who have suggested they agree with the concept of differentiated but common responsibility share the most common goal with the least developed countries. As we contribute so little to global greenhouse gas emissions, last calculated by the World Bank at 0.24 megatons per annum, 1.3% of that contributed by the United States of America, yet the least developed countries are going to continue to be the ones most affected by the devastation caused. We agree with those countries who are willing to combat as much as they contribute. To share the responsibility evenly would place an impossible burden on those who require the most help. This is why we have shared our favour of the differentiated responsibility. Countries opposed to sharing responsibility, namely the largest and most powerful, pose a direct threat to the future of the least developed countries as the climate worsens. This information is taken from and can be found on the documents constituting the recent Paris Conventions. Thank you.